Hello, I'm Ashley, the engineer at Andover Norton. Now, one of the things that's come to light in recent weeks is that people have been blowing up their rectifier regulators and their ignition systems. Now, Steve at Tri-Spark seemed to think it's people connecting the actual Tri-Spark systems around the wrong way. I don't think it is. I think a lot of it stems, especially this time of year, is when people start to put the batteries back in their bikes or take it out to charge it and go put it back in and get it round the wrong way. If you connect a battery momentarily, even round the wrong way, you will do a considerable amount of damage to the ignition and the Tri-Spark. Now, there is ways around that can prevent you doing it. If you take the battery out, take the fuse out as well, because if you do inadvertently put it back in round the wrong way, chances are you ain't going to do so much damage to the rest of the circuit on the bike. Before you put the battery back into a bike, double check in your own mind and visually that you're going to put the right cable on the right end of the battery. I know it sounds daft, you most probably done it, some of you most probably 300 or 400 times, but it only takes that one time you forget, you're in a rush, whatever, and then you just screwed up your ignition and your rectifier regulator. The other thing we get a question on occasionally, what is positive earth? I know that sounds strange to some people, but some people out there don't have the knowledge or experience of some of the older people that have been around the classic bikes or motorcycles in general. And most British bikes are positive earth. The Norton Commandos are all positive earth. That means the positive terminal of the actual battery, this one here, goes to the frame. You may see this called positive ground, massa with a plus sign beside it, and positive earth, which is generally what most people in the UK refer to it as a way of earthing the positive terminal to the actual frame of the bike. Now, when you look in the battery compartment, you might not actually see anywhere where it goes from the positive terminal to the actual frame. The reason being for that, along the loom, there are places where the red wire for the British bikes will actually attach to things like the top of where the bracket support plate for the coils are, etc., or onto the head steady isolation, the isolation system for the head attaches to the bracket there. Now, that comes on to the next one. If you're going to get sparks, you need to have the thread connected back to the positive side of this battery. Now, some people powder coat or paint a frame, put it back in and find they're most probably not getting a great sparks. It's probably due to one, you either got earth wire connected onto the head of the engine or in that vicinity, or two, you haven't got a circuit via the crankcases back via the cradle to the actual positive terminal here. Now, it's essential you have a good earth system. If you haven't and you've got resistance in your earth system back to the battery, you're going to be losing a certain amount of your voltage. Now, on a 6-volt system, if you lose 1 volt, that's a considerable amount of voltage. On a 12-volt system, if you lose 1 volt, it's not too bad. Ideally, you don't want to be losing any at all. Now, some people will use a multimeter. I know there are some people out there, believe it or not, using moving coil avos still. Nothing wrong with them. Good bit of kit, and I believe they're still used in some industries around the UK, especially where they're doing nuclear instrumentation. Now, the thing with a multimeter is, I've seen people put it on the diode check setting or a continuity setting. Be very careful when you do that. If you're going to be testing from the wire that goes to the positive terminal across the points on your frame, stick it on resistance, stick it on the ohm scale. The reason you do that is because it will give you a reading, i.e. 1 or 2 ohms. If you use a continuity, depending on what figure's set within the push button menus on some of the multimeters, it may trigger at 10% of the reading you selected. So if you're on 400 ohms, it most probably will check at about 40 ohms. If you've got 20 ohms resistance somewhere, that's a lot to lose. So use the resistance setting of a multimeter. Try not to use the diode or continuity function. Likewise, if you've got something like a metronome, don't use that as insulation resistance. Pointless. Now, brings on to the next one, the red cable. If you've got an Alton electric start or a Mark III commando, this one cable that connects the engine from the stud back to the battery is an essential bit of the bike, especially when it comes to the wiring. Now, you can see this cable is different from the rest, and what this actually does is that when you press the starter, which is attached to the engine, it allows the current to go back to the battery. And there's an awful lot of that current going back to the battery. Now, without this, if you've got a good earth system via the normal loom wiring, it will still try to turn the starter, but not for very long, because that cabling on the looms most probably only going to be momentarily capable of carrying something like 16 amps for a very short period. It's normally rated about 8 amps, and as you can see, when you start putting 170 amps down it, it tends to melt and get all smoky. Now, the reason I say this cable is so important, I've been fitting electronic ignitions to my bike, and I've actually stood up under the handlebars and twice hit the start button on the bike with the ignition on. Thankfully, this was connected and the bike just burst into life. Yeah, I've done it twice myself, so bear that one in mind. If you're working on the right hand side of the bike on the electronic ignition, always make sure this cable's connected. So if you do inadvertently catch that start button, that the current's got somewhere to go and it's not going to mount your loom. It doesn't teach you to become electricians, but it does give you an idea of what you need to check. And one of the things, if you just take one thing away from the day, check the cables and the terminations on that you can see in your battery compartment. Confirm with yourself which side of the battery they'll go on. Just do not get it wrong. And the other thing as well, which is also a good idea to do, if you ever take a battery off a bike, is to put something over one of the terminals. I've seen people pick a battery up and touch both terminals, and strangely enough it makes them go ouch, and they sometimes end up with a little hole in their hand where the actual spark got them. Yeah, even a small 12 volt battery will give you quite a hit to make you jump. If you've got any questions about that, please feel free to get in touch and ask myself or Simon, or send us an email and we can try and help you out where you can. Thank you very much.